Nobody prepares you for the silence that follows a funeral. Not the quiet of an empty house, that kind I expected. What I didn't expect was the silence from the people who were supposed to fill it. Connie died on a Friday morning in March. Ovarian cancer. 14 months from the first symptom she dismissed, as stressed to the last breath she took in a hospital bed, while I held her hand and the window showed a parking lot and a gray Ohio sky. She was 57. She had a notebook on her nightstand in the last weeks, full of things she kept meaning to do. Learn Portuguese, take a pottery class, see the Grand Canyon at sunrise. We always said we'd get there eventually. Eventually never came. I'm telling you this so you understand what I walked back into when I drove home from that hospital. A house that still smelled like her, a coffee maker still set to her preferred brew strength, a stack of library books she'd never finish on the table beside the couch. I was 59 years old, 31 years married to a woman who made every ordinary Tuesday feel like something worth remembering, and I was about to find out exactly what my family was made of. Welcome to Dad's Calm Revenge. If you're new here, grab a seat, and if you've been here before, you know how these stories go. Subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Let me give you the cast, because every story has one. My daughter Elaine is 34. She lives 38 minutes away in the suburb we moved her into when she started kindergarten. She married a guy named Scott 2 years before Connie got sick, and they have a 4-year-old daughter named Poppy who has Connie's laugh and doesn't know it yet. My son Garrett is 31. He lives 11 minutes from my front door. 11 minutes. I have driven it. I have timed it. 11 minutes, no traffic lights, one turn. He works in tech sales and owns a rescue dog named something I can never remember, and pays roughly $2,200 a month for an apartment he is almost never in because he is always busy. My brother-in-law Ted is Connie's younger brother, 52, lives an hour out, calls himself a family man at every holiday gathering. My sister Roberta is 65, the oldest of us, lives 45 minutes away, has strong opinions about everything and strong availability for nothing. That's 4 people. 4 people within a 1-hour radius of my front door. At the funeral, they all came. Of course they came. Elaine cried beautifully. Scott put his hand on my shoulder. Garrett wore a tie for the first time since his college graduation and stood very straight, the way men do when they don't know what to do with grief. Ted made a speech that was mostly about himself. Roberta organized the food table and told me 3 times that Connie would have wanted me to be strong. She wasn't wrong, but it wasn't what I needed. What I needed was someone to call me on a random Wednesday night and say nothing in particular. What I needed was someone to show up on a Sunday, when the quiet in that house became something I could actually feel pressing against my chest. What I needed was for my family to understand that grief doesn't end at the reception. It starts there. The first weeks, I cooked. That was how I handled it. Connie had always been the one who knew what to do in the kitchen. I had been the guy who could grill and make one reliable pasta dish and not much else. But grief does something to you when you're alone at 7 p.m. and the television feels too loud and the quiet feels too quiet and you need something, anything, to put your hands on. So I taught myself to cook. I started with things I had watched Connie make 100 times. Her chicken soup, her banana bread, a pot roast that I only half ruined the first 3 attempts. I bought cookbooks. I watched videos. I made things I had never eaten and ate them alone, and felt in some strange way closer to her through that act than through almost anything else. And I invited people over. The first Sunday after the funeral, I called Elaine. I made soup. Come for dinner. She came. Scott came. Poppy sat in the high chair we'd bought for visits and threw half her food on the floor, and it was the most alive that kitchen had felt in months. I called Garrett. He came too late, with a bottle of wine he couldn't really afford, and a guilty look on his face that I chose not to address. Roberta drove over. Ted said he'd try to make it and didn't, which was enough of a pattern that I should have noted it then. That first Sunday, the table was full. 4 adults and a toddler, and enough noise to make the walls feel like they held something again. I stood at the counter after dinner, watching Elaine hand Poppy pieces of bread, watching Garrett argue with Scott about something sports-related and completely unimportant, and I thought, we are going to be okay. I was wrong. I want to be precise about how wrong I was, because the wrongness unfolded slowly, and slow wrongness is the kind that sneaks past you. The second Sunday, Elaine texted that Poppy had a cold. Fine. The third Sunday, Scott had a thing. The fourth, Garrett didn't respond until 8 p.m. to say he was sorry, he'd lost track of time. Roberta came twice more and then started having prior commitments. Ted came once total after the funeral and spent most of the meal talking about his investment portfolio. By month 4, I was eating alone most Sundays. I kept cooking. That part didn't change. But I started putting the leftovers directly into containers before I sat down, because there was no point letting them cool on the table for people who weren't coming. The calls were worse. In the first year after Connie died, I logged them. I am not a man who logs things normally. I am not a spreadsheet person or a record keeper. But somewhere around month 5, I started noting them in a journal I kept in the kitchen drawer, because something felt off and I needed to see it on paper to believe it. Elaine called 9 times in 12 months. 2 of those were to ask if I had Connie's cornbread recipe. 1 was a pocket dial. Garrett called 4 times. 1 of those was to ask if I still had his old snowboard in the garage. I did. He did not come to retrieve it. Roberta called 6 times. Which sounds better, until you realize 3 of those calls were under 4 minutes, and 2 of them were during her commute when she clearly wasn't listening. Ted called once, to tell me about an investment opportunity I should consider. 19 calls in 12 months. From 4 people, 2 of whom were my children, 1 of whom lived 11 minutes away. I am not exaggerating. I checked the journal twice. Year 2, I kept calling them. I want you to understand this because it matters. I was not a man sitting by the phone waiting to be wronged. I reached out. I initiated. I drove to Elaine's house one Saturday just to see Poppy. Just to have something to do with my Saturday. That didn't involve staring at the spot on the couch where Connie used to sit with her book. When Elaine opened the door, she looked surprised, and not entirely pleased surprised. Dad, we're kind of in the middle of something. I said no problem, I was just passing through. I lived 38 minutes away. I drove back and made dinner for 1 and watched a nature documentary I didn't care about. Garrett, I tried differently. I texted. I left messages. I kept them short so they wouldn't feel like obligation. Hey, made chili. Enough for the whole neighborhood. Stop by if you want. He stopped by twice in that entire second year. Once when his heat went out and he needed somewhere to sleep. Once when he needed me to co-sign something at his bank. Both times he ate 2 bowls of whatever was on the stove and said, "Dad, this is incredible." And I smiled and meant it. And then the door closed and the quiet came back. Year 3, I told my doctor I was having trouble sleeping. She asked if I had a support system. I said yes, because I was embarrassed to say otherwise. Year 3 was also when I tried to talk to Roberta about it directly. We met for lunch, her suggestion, a place halfway between our houses that she chose, because it was on her way to somewhere else. I said, "Roberta, I need to say something." She looked up from her menu. I said, "I feel like I've been invisible since Connie died. I cook every Sunday and almost nobody comes. I call and the calls don't get returned. I'm struggling and I don't know how else to say that." She put down the menu and reached across and squeezed my hand. "You know we love you," she said. "It's just that life gets so busy. You understand?" I said. I understood. She changed the subject to her kitchen remodel within 90 seconds. I tried with Garrett around year 4. We met for coffee, which was an achievement in itself because scheduling it took 11 days of back and forth text messages. I told him I felt like I'd lost the family when I lost his mother. I told him I wasn't saying that to make him feel guilty. I just wanted him to know where I was. He looked at his coffee cup for a long time, and then he said, "Dad, I know I've been bad at this, I'll do better." He called once in the next 3 months to ask about the snowboard. Year 5, Elaine had another baby. A boy this time, named something beginning with J that I will not use here. I drove 38 minutes to the hospital the day he was born, held him for 11 minutes before they needed me to leave, and drove 38 minutes home. They didn't ask if I wanted to stay for dinner. I wasn't invited to the welcome home gathering the following week. I found out about it from a photo on Elaine's social media. 14 people crowded into her living room, casseroles on every surface, and my face not among them. I sat with that photo for a while. Then I called her and congratulated her and asked how she was feeling. She sounded genuinely happy and genuinely surprised that I called. I told her I loved her. I hung up and went and stood in the kitchen for a very long time. Something was changing in me. Not breaking, I want to be clear about that. Not falling apart. More like a very slow, very quiet recalibration. The way a compass corrects itself when you stop holding it crooked. Year 6, my brother-in-law Ted called to ask if I would contribute to a family beach house rental for the summer. $4,000, split 5 ways. He had already discussed it with Roberta and Elaine and Garrett. Nobody had mentioned it to me until the logistics were being finalized. When I asked where my invitation had been, Ted said he assumed I wouldn't want to come, being how things had been. I asked how things had been. He said, quiet. I said I had been quiet because no one was calling. He said that was fair, but the deposit was due Friday. I did not contribute to the beach house. Year 6 was also when Garrett needed money. $32,000. A situation with a business partner. I won't go into the details because they don't hold up to examination, and a window of about 3 weeks to resolve it before things became significantly worse. He called me, actually called. Voice call, which I noted because it had been 2 months since his last one. He said, "Dad, I need help. I know I haven't been around like I should, I know, but I need you." Here is what I did. I gave him the money. I gave it to him because he was my son, and I loved him, and because Connie would have looked at me with those particular eyes of hers, the ones that said you know what to do, and I did know. I gave it to him because some stubborn, unkillable part of me still believed that maybe this was the thing that would crack the shell, the thing that would shake loose whatever had calcified between us and let some warmth back through. Garrett paid me back. I give him that fully and without caveat, 14 months, regular payments, every dollar returned. During those 14 months he called 11 times. He came to Sunday dinner 4 times. He texted just to check in twice. The day the final payment cleared, his calls went from monthly to every 6 weeks, and then to nothing. 3 months of silence after the last check. I know he didn't plan it. I'm not sure it matters whether he planned it. Year 7, year 8. I turned 67 in November, and I put a pot roast in the slow cooker at 7 a.m. because cooking it felt like the right thing to do, and also because I had been doing it so long it required no decision. I set the table for 5 people. Old habit, impossible to kill. I called Elaine, I called Garrett, I called Roberta, I called Ted. Elaine said they had something with Scott's family. Garrett texted happy birthday with a cake emoji. Roberta said she might stop by but didn't. Ted didn't respond. I ate the pot roast alone at a table set for 5. I sat there after dinner with the plates still out, and I talked to Connie the way I had been doing since she died, the way that stops feeling embarrassing around year 3 when you realize the alternative. Talking to no one is measurably worse. I said, "Connie, what do I do with this?" She didn't answer. She's been gone 8 years. But I waited the way you wait when you already know and you're just not ready. Then I got up and cleared the table and washed every dish. And somewhere in the quiet of that, the decision finished forming. I didn't tell anyone. That was the first and most essential rule. I called a financial planner in a city I had no reason to call. A woman I found through a referral from my doctor, which means nobody in my family's orbit knew her name. I spent 2 months reorganizing. Retirement accounts, savings, the investments I had mostly left alone since Connie died. Not hiding anything, nothing I did was illegal, but consolidating, repositioning, making the picture harder to read at a glance. I had more than most people my age. 31 years of 2 incomes, careful decisions, a mortgage paid off in 2019. The number was significant. I called a realtor, not a local one, a woman from an agency 2 counties over. She walked through the house with a clipboard and said it would list around $485,000. I said list it. She gave me the same look people give when they think you might regret something. I told her I'd had 8 years to think about it. She listed it. It sold in 19 days. A young couple from out of state, relocating for work. They wanted to close in 6 weeks. I said that worked for me. While the house was in escrow, I started on the rest of it. New phone number, given to exactly no one in my family. Social media, which Connie had set up for me, and which I'd kept running in the years after, because shutting it down felt like one more erasure. I shut it down. The landline, which nobody called anymore except robocalls and Roberta during her commute, canceled. I found a place. Not in Ohio. Not in any state where anyone in my family would think to look first. A small town in western North Carolina, the kind that sits in the fold of mountains, where the light comes in sideways in the mornings, and everything smells like pine and river water. Two-bedroom apartment, one of which I turned into the study I had always told Connie I would eventually have. She used to say, "Someday you'll have your room full of books and terrible jazz records, and you'll never leave it." She wasn't wrong about the records. I packed what mattered. Connie's photographs, the quilt her mother had made us as a wedding gift, her grandmother's cast-iron skillet, which had been in the family longer than I had, my books, more than I could easily carry. I left the furniture. I left the slow cooker I'd used for 8 years of Sunday dinners nobody came to. I left the table. On the last morning, I walked through every room. I stood in the kitchen the longest. Then I put the key in an envelope on the counter for the realtor, stepped outside, and drove away without looking back, because I knew if I looked back I would remember the wrong things. The town is called Delwood, population somewhere under 4,000, depending on who's counting and what season. It sits between two ridges, and the nearest highway is 20 minutes out. And there is a creek that runs behind the row of houses on my street that makes a sound I can only describe as relentless and useful, like something that doesn't know how to stop moving forward. I liked it immediately. I unpacked my books. I hung Connie's photographs. I put her skillet on the stove. I slept 9 hours the first night, which, if you understand what it is to spend 8 years waking at 4 in the morning with that particular flavor of loneliness that lives in familiar rooms, you know is roughly equivalent to a medical miracle. The first 2 weeks were disorienting in a way that I can only call productive. I kept reaching for my old phone. I kept almost calling people who had trained me over 8 years not to expect them to answer. The muscle memory of hoping is surprisingly stubborn. I didn't call. Instead, I walked. The town has a trail along the ridge that takes about 90 minutes if you take the long way around, and I started taking the long way every morning. Just me in the fog and the sound of birds I had no names for yet, and the distant shape of mountains that didn't care about any of my history. I found a hardware store run by a man named, I'll call him Max, because he'd hate me using his real name, who turned out to have opinions about woodworking that were both numerous and correct. I started going in on Thursday mornings. We argued about joinery. It was better than I expected anything to be. A month passed. Then 7 weeks. Then Elaine called my old number and got a message saying the number had been disconnected. I know this because what happened next, I reconstructed from conversations much later. Elaine called Garrett. Garrett tried my old cell. Same result. Garrett called Roberta. Roberta tried the house landline and got nothing. Someone, I believe it was Roberta, drove to my address in Ohio and found strangers living in it. A woman answered the door with paint on her hands. They were renovating, and told her they'd bought the house about 2 months ago. Roberta stood on the porch, I am told, for a full minute before she said anything. She drove home and called everyone. What followed was, by all accounts, a very loud few days. Garrett tried to file a missing persons report. The officer he spoke to explained, with what I imagine was considerable patience, that a man in his late 60s who had sold his house, closed his accounts, and canceled his phone was not missing. He had left. There was a legal distinction. Garrett did not find this comforting. Elaine hired someone, not a private investigator exactly, more of a general-purpose locator, the kind of person who does this for families in these situations and charges accordingly. It took him 6 weeks. I had used my real name everywhere in Delwood. The lease, the library card I got in the second week, the membership at a small gym 2 blocks from my apartment. I wasn't hiding. I just hadn't told anyone where I was, and it turns out those 2 things are remarkably different in practice. The locator found me on a Thursday morning. I came back from my walk to find a car parked in front of my building that I didn't know, and sitting on the front steps was my Garrett. He looked terrible. That's the only honest way to say it. Unshaved, dark circles, the look of a man who had been driving for 7 hours and had rehearsed something to say and was now no longer sure any of it would work. "Dad," he said. "Garrett," I said. We didn't know where you were. Nobody knew. I thought about the 4 calls in 12 months. I thought about the snowboard. I thought about $32,000 and 11 months of regular contact followed by 3 months of silence. I know, I said. That was the idea. His face did something complicated. We thought, I didn't know if you were okay. I didn't know if something had happened. I'm fine, I said. Do you want to come in? He came in. He sat at my kitchen table and looked around at the apartment. The books, the photographs, the skillet on the stove, the mountains visible through the window in a way the Ohio house never had anything comparable to. You seem okay, he said, and there was something in how he said it that I recognized. Surprise, yes, but also something harder to name. Like a man who braced for an emergency and found a garden instead. I am okay, I said. Coffee? He said yes. I made it. We sat with it for a moment. Then I said, Garrett, when's my birthday? He looked up. What? My birthday. What's the date? Dad, come on. What's the date? A pause. November, he said. November, he trailed off. The 14th, I said. I've had the same birthday for 67 years. He looked at the table. How many times did you call me in the last year? Before I left, Dad. I counted. You can tell me if I'm wrong. He was quiet for a long time. Not enough, he said finally, quietly. 4 times, I said. One of those was about the snowboard. One was about the bank. 2 were actual calls. And one of those I missed because I was in the shower and you didn't leave a message. I looked at him. You lived 11 minutes away. The mountain out the window was very still. Garrett's hands were around his coffee mug. I cooked every Sunday for 8 years, I said. I set the table. I called. I showed up at Elaine's door, and she told me she was in the middle of something. I tried to talk to Roberta, and she changed the subject in 90 seconds. I gave you $32,000, and you called me 11 times in 14 months, and then went quiet the day the last check cleared. I talked to your mother about it because I had no one else to talk to, and she's been gone 8 years. He was crying now. Not dramatically. Just quietly, the way a man cries when he doesn't want to and can't stop it. Dad, he started. I know sorry is not enough, I said. Yeah, I know. I kept meaning to call. Every week I'd think about it and then I'd think I'd do it tomorrow and then tomorrow kept moving, I said. Yeah. I stood up and walked to the window. The ridge was catching the morning light in that sideways way it does here, all the green going briefly gold. I'm not angry at you, I said. I mean that. I'm not sitting here with 8 years of resentment waiting to unload. I made peace with this. That's actually why I could leave. Then why? Because I needed you to understand that your availability to people doesn't maintain itself. People who love you and keep showing up and keep hoping, they have a limit. I found mine. I turned back to look at him. I'm not that person anymore. The one who set 5 plates for 4 people who weren't coming. That man is done. Garrett wiped his face with the back of his hand. So what does this mean? You're gone? We don't have a father anymore? You have a father, I said. I'm right here. But the version of me you could reach any time you remembered I existed, that you could leave on hold indefinitely and find exactly where you left him. That one retired. He sat with that. The creek out back was running. I could hear it faintly through the walls. Is there a way back? He asked. Forward, I said. There's a way forward. But it looks like 2 people who respect each other's time. Who call before they need something. Who remember that the other person's birthday falls in November on the 14th. Who show up before there's a crisis. I sat back down. I'm not hard to find anymore. But I'm also not waiting. He left in the early afternoon. He didn't look back when he pulled out of the lot. That struck me as possibly good. Elaine came 2 weeks later. She found a parking spot and knocked, and I let her in, and she stood in my kitchen, looking at the same things Garrett had looked at, but her face was different. Where Garrett had looked guilty, Elaine looked wounded. There's a gap between those 2 things that matters. Dad, she said, you just vanished. Poppy keeps asking where you are. I thought about the baby's welcome home party I found out about, through a photograph. I thought about 38 minutes drive for 11 minutes with a newborn, and then 38 minutes back alone. Does she? I said. She loves you. I know she does. I poured water for tea without asking if she wanted it. Do you know how many times you called me last year, Elaine? Before I left. Dad, 9. And 2 of those were about your mother's cornbread recipe. She sat down at the table. She looked like she might argue with the number and then decided not to. I had 2 kids, she said. Scott and I were barely keeping our heads above water. I know, I said. I also know that 44 people commented on Poppy's birthday post the week I found out I hadn't been invited to his welcome home party. She went very still. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, I said. I'm trying to help you understand that I saw things. I noticed things. I noticed everything, for 8 years, and I kept showing up anyway because you were my daughter and that's what you do. And then I stopped. We're your family, she said. You are, I said. That doesn't automatically mean what you think it means, she cried. Elaine has always cried cleanly, the way some people do, and I handed her a dish towel and sat across from her and watched my daughter put her face in her hands, and I felt 2 things at once. The instinct to comfort her, as strong as ever, and something else underneath it that was simply resolved. Quiet, unmovable. Are you going to forgive us? She asked. I thought about Connie's notebook. Pottery class, Grand Canyon at sunrise. Forgiving you isn't really the issue, I said. I don't have a list of grievances I'm tallying. What I have is a different understanding of how I want to spend the time I have left. I looked at her. I spent 8 years being available to people who treated my availability like it would never run out. It ran out. That's not punishment. That's just what happened. So that's it, she said. You're just done, not done, I said. Different. I love you, Elaine. I will love you for the rest of my life. But love is not the same thing as unconditional access. You can't set something down for years and then pick it back up and expect it to be exactly where you left it. She drove home. She called me from the road, I think, because the next day Garrett texted me saying Elaine was upset. I told him I knew. He asked what I'd said to her. I told him the truth. There was a pause in the texts and then, are you actually okay out there? Like really okay? I thought about my morning walks, the hardware store, the creek, the 9 hours of sleep. I'm genuinely fine, I typed back. That's not a performance. His response took a few minutes. I believe you. That's somehow worse. I know, I replied. I know. Roberta came on a Saturday, driving up unannounced in the white SUV she'd had since I could remember. I saw her from the window pulling into the lot, and I stood there with my coffee and felt nothing dramatic, just a kind of steady readiness. She sat at my table and looked around and said, You look well. I am well, I said. James. She put her hands flat on the table. I need you to understand how frightened everyone was. I sat down. Roberta, when I told you I was struggling, when I said I was invisible, that I was lonely, that I needed my family, what did you say to me? She blinked. You squeezed my hand and said, life gets busy, and then you talked about your kitchen remodel. She opened her mouth and closed it. That was year 3, I said. I tried to tell you. You heard me and then you moved on. So I moved on too. It just took me 5 more years to figure out where to. James, we didn't realize. I know you didn't. That's the part I actually believe. I looked at her steadily. You didn't realize. 8 years of Sundays, and I kept cooking and calling and showing up and you didn't realize. At some point, that says something about what you were paying attention to. She was quiet. I love you, I said. I mean that. But are you going to forgive us doesn't work like a vending machine, Roberta. You don't push the button and get the thing. Forgiveness isn't what I'm withholding. What I'm withholding is the version of me that was available on demand, indefinitely, regardless of what I received in return. That version went offline. He's not coming back. She left after an hour. She'd been crying, which I hadn't expected, and I handed her the dish towel like I had with Elaine, and she took it, and at the door she stopped and said, I really did love Connie. I know, I said, she loved you too. That was the truest and the saddest thing said between us. Ted called but didn't come. He said he understood why I had done what I did, which I doubted, and that he hoped I knew the family wasn't going anywhere, which was probably true though, not in the way he meant it. I thanked him for calling and told him I wished him well. He paused like he expected more and then said, Okay then, I guess. I said I guess so too. We hung up. Garrett, in the end, was the one who surprised me most. He drove back 3 months after the first visit. Didn't announce it, just showed up. And this time when I came back from my walk, he was sitting on the steps with 2 cups of coffee from the place 2 blocks over. He had found it somehow, Done the reconnaissance. He handed me one when I came up. I looked up your birthday, he said. I took the cup, sat next to him on the steps. November 14th, he said. Yeah, I put it in my phone, alarm and everything. He looked sideways at me. I know that's not impressive. I know that's the bare minimum. It's a start, I said. We drank our coffees. The mountain was doing its morning thing with the light. Down the street, someone was mowing a lawn, and the smell of cut grass came over us in a wave that was unexpectedly, pointlessly good. I looked up Delwood, Garrett said. There's a craft brewery about a mile from here. Apparently good. I've been meaning to try it, I said. Maybe this afternoon, he said, if you want. I looked at him. He was 31 years old, and he looked a little like Connie around the eyes, and he had driven 7 hours on a Thursday with 2 cups of coffee and a plan to make a start. It wasn't everything. It was not the 8 years of Sundays, not the calls that didn't come, not the birthday dinners I ate alone. But it was something, and something offered sincerely is a different thing from nothing. This afternoon, I said. Yeah. We sat in the quiet a while longer before we got up. Here is what I want you to understand about the thing I did. I was not having a crisis. I was not making a dramatic gesture to force a reaction. I was not, as Roberta seemed briefly to suspect, losing my mind. I was a 67-year-old man who had spent 8 years as a constant, who had kept the light on long past the point where anyone was navigating by it, and who had finally made a clear-eyed decision to stop. I gave them 8 years. 8 years of Sundays, of unreturned calls, of driving to doorsteps uninvited, of telling the people I loved that I was struggling and being told I was understood, and then not being reached out to again for 6 weeks. I gave them a $32,000 loan and watched what happened when it was repaid. I gave them chances, and I gave them honesty, and I gave them a father sitting alone at a table set for 5 on his 67th birthday. And then I stopped giving, and I started living. Delwood is very good in the mornings. The light comes in at an angle that makes everything look like it's been considered carefully before being placed. I walk the ridge trail and I argue about joinery on Thursdays, and I cook well, and eat well, and sleep 8 hours most nights. My phone has Garrett's number in it, and he calls more than he used to, not perfectly, but more. Elaine sends photos of Poppy that I look at longer than she probably knows. Roberta and I have had 2 phone calls that went past 30 minutes and didn't feel like obligation on either side. Ted still mostly talks about investments. Some things are what they are. Connie's photographs are on the shelf across from the window, so the morning light hits them first. I talk to her still, because grief doesn't expire on a schedule and because she would have told me to. Some mornings I tell her about the walk. Some mornings I tell her what I finally did. I think she would have said, it took long enough. She was always faster at this than me. But she also would have said that the point wasn't the leaving. The point was the decision to believe I was worth showing up for. The point was the table. I finally, at 67 years old, stopped setting for people who had forgotten where I lived. I booked the trip to the Grand Canyon for April. Sunrise at the South Rim, which I looked up and which is apparently the kind of thing that makes you understand why people make notebooks full of things they haven't done yet. I'm going alone. I'm bringing Connie's photograph and a thermos of very good coffee, and I intend to stand at the edge of something enormous and feel, for once, exactly the right size. She wanted to go eventually. Eventually is now. I'm going for both of us.